Dr. Hang serves as the president and CEO of the Amherst Foundation and has extensive experience in the public and nonprofit sectors, serving low-income and under-resourced populations. She's committed to achieving an equitable society where everyone can prosper. Having overcome adversity in her own childhood and young adult life, MayKao believes in the power of changing one's life at a time and strengthening the social and civic infrastructure of our communities to transform the world. MayKao has a BA degree in psychology from Brown University, an MA degree in social policy and distributive justice from the Hubert H. Humphrey School of Public Affairs, and a doctorate in public administration from Hamline University. She serves as a trustee of the Minnesota Philanthropy Partners, Deputy Chair of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, 9th District, a board member of the Twin Cities Local Initiative Support Corporation, and an advisory committee member of the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. She has been recognized with awards including the Anne Bancroft Award, the Humphrey Public Leadership Award, and the Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans Leadership Award. She was named one of Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Journal's 40 Under 40 in 2011. We're so delighted to have her as our keynote speaker this year. Please help me welcome Dr. MayKao Hang.
I also am very short, so I'm hoping that the people in the back can see me. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's really an honor to be here this morning to help recognize, celebrate, and affirm the University of Minnesota's commitment to advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion. It's inspiring to be among you, those who are living out this core value, to make sure that we live in a society where all people, regardless of background, can have access and opportunity to full, productive lives, and can contribute their talents. So to start, I'd like to actually ask President Kaler to give me his pair of glasses. Okay, now I really can't see. And neither can President Kaler. And I really can't read my speech because this is pretty awful, so I'm gonna take it off. So this is maybe how it's like to be a 6'3" white guy, maybe, you know? And as a 5'1", very short Hmong woman whose language is Hmong and then English, it's a little different. So I'm gonna give these back to him. The framework and lens from which we live our lives is so important. It's what makes us who we are, and too often we don't even know who we are. And then, like seen through the pair of glasses, we project and see what we want to see in the world, when instead we should see that the other person also has their own pair of glasses and that their worldview is different, and somehow we have to meet in the middle. As people of color, as people who are heterosexual, as people who have different orientations in life, different levels of ability, we can be all too judgmental about the shoes that we've walked in and the shoes that other people have walked in. But as long as we remember the bond of humanity which we all share, as long as we're intentional and we try to learn, I believe that we can achieve a more equitable society. So this morning I'd like to touch on three things. First, I'd like to share with you an image that I hold on to when things get really hard for me for advancing equity and diversity and inclusion. Second, I'd like to share some lessons I've learned in my years of working to advance equity and diversity in respective leadership roles in the public and private and actually nonprofit sector, especially in our workplaces, because that's a part of what this is about. And third, I'd like to issue a challenge to you in the upcoming year. But first, I'd like to give you a little background about the Wilder Foundation, because it's the organization that I lead. So Wilder Foundation is a nonprofit organization that's actually dedicated to improving the human condition, founded in 1906 108 years of being committed to the human condition and serving all people regardless of background. It has one of the earliest anti-discrimination and inclusion clauses on record in the state of Minnesota and perhaps nationally. Pre-civil rights movement during a time when, in St. Paul anyway, 3 out of 4 people were foreign born. For over a century, the Wilder Foundation has served those who are of low income, in need, or needed health services, who are sick. We provide direct services and build the capacity of the community to do the same thing through leadership development, applied social research and evaluation, and experimenting to improve the human condition with different solutions. You could call us the smart human services people in town. For example, we're getting ready to launch a mobile grocery store that will eliminate transportation barriers and create healthy access to food in low-income neighborhoods in St. Paul. In the city of St. Paul, every 2.5 miles that you go, a Wilder staff person or volunteer is delivering a critical human service to someone who's in need. And last year, the equivalent of about 18% of the St. Paul population, or 55,000 people, convened at our building for mission-related activities. So there's a long legacy of trying to do diversity and equity and inclusion work at the Wilder Foundation. But I want you to know that we're not done, that it's been a long journey, and that we still have so far to go. And because we're not just bringing our own organization along, we're bringing so many other organizations along in mission-related activities related to diversity and inclusion. It's become a part of my primary mission to share what we're doing and to talk about diversity and equity as something that we as an entire community need to address. So now I'd like to move on to the image that I hold in my head when things get really hard. Though I don't look it, I came to this country when I was 4, speaking no English, poor, living in a refugee camp. No strangers that I knew back in Thailand or Laos or friends were here upon arrival. And when I first got married and moved through my life, my husband Lou and I, who is also Hmong, lived in a rough neighborhood in St. Paul. For example, one day when my husband left his car in the alley, he came out from our apartment to find that poop and urine had been poured on his Honda Accord. It was normal to find broken windows in our apartment because so many rocks were thrown at it. This was a neighborhood that was in transition. It was the real world. It was not the world of the University of Minnesota. I had already graduated from the Humphrey School here. It was a mostly white, low-income neighborhood that was transitioning into a Black and Hmong neighborhood, full of Hmong refugees. With people of so many different races moving in, we were targets of violence and harassment almost every single day. I don't even know from whom. Even kids on the street called me names. One night, my husband used his hands to stop the flow of blood because a man who was living next door had just been stabbed. We called 911. He had been stabbed in the stomach because of a domestic situation with his wife. He was choking her, and she grabbed a knife and stabbed him. At the time, I was giving our newborn 6-month-old son. I was first-time parent, and just the struggles seemed to be completely hopeless, endless, and insurmountable. I couldn't even deal with it every day when I came home from work. And then one day, when I was doing dishes, I looked out of the kitchen window and saw something that almost made my heart stop. And the tears came streaming down my face. Can you guess what it was? I'll tell you. In the alley behind my apartment complex, I saw the backs of 2 little girls, their skirts fluttering in the wind. One Black and one Asian. I think it was a Hmong girl from the neighborhood. Both about 7 years old, holding hands, keeping each other safe, walking across the shards of broken glass in the very narrow alley. The very dangerous alley where my husband had left his car. Each of the girls was taking turns helping the other one get across. And in that moment, I saw a flash of the beauty that is the unconditional love that can overcome fear of difference, that can be present in humankind and in children and in all of us before we destroy it with our structural inequality and the socialization forces that had been built over 350 years of colonialism, war, slavery, displacement. As a nation of displaced people, I understand at least for America, I understand at least that we cannot overcome some of the legacies that we have created as a society. If we built these organizations, we can unbuild them. We can change. The future was presented in this image of these little girls to erase my pessimism and hatred that had started to fill my heart, where forgiveness was impossible because the ills of society continued to plague us and me throughout my career. We cannot forget that it has only been 50 years that women and those of disadvantaged backgrounds were not subjected to violence, harassment, and even death if we asserted ourselves as people of color and as people of disadvantaged backgrounds to push outside of our social boundaries. Why do we think that in 50 years we can overcome the hundreds of years of torture, terror, and so much else? And you know, advancing equity and diversity is like that. It can be beautiful, but hard. It can be dangerous, professionally, emotionally, and everything else. And holding hands across races, classes, income levels is absolutely necessary. We, as human beings who sit in these esteemed halls, are the privileged few. Those who can gain a college education and move forward to be professors, administrators, presidents of foundations, mean that great responsibility comes with us, and we can never forget the valiant efforts of those who died and paved the path for us to actually be here to even celebrate equity and diversity at the University of Minnesota. So celebrate this morning, but know that we are not done. Hold your own images to anchor you about why this work is essential. We must claim our own humanity, and we must not sink into complacency. Don't stop sweeping that alley. We should sweep it as often as we should and could, those of us who sit inside academia with the privilege of education. Outside of these walls lies reality. In a short time period, you as administrators and people in this community need to shape the minds of so many. Though I am grateful for all that you have done, I want you to know that you hold the most power over the minds of the future. Though we generate and create knowledge, it's the application of such knowledge and the practice when we actually go outside of the University of Minnesota into professional roles or into careers where we must extend ourselves. This is the safest climate for experimentation. If you guys can't do it, who is going to? Unless we extend ourselves beyond our comfort zone, we will not make progress. So find your own image and anchor yourself. Have love overcome fear. Have courage and be brave. Extend beyond the boundaries of which you are comfortable. Now, in my second item, I'd like to share some things that I've learned along the way to create a more equitable society where diversity is not only celebrated, but put to work to create strategic advantages. First, I want you to know that a lesson is that progress does not come without discomfort, conflict, and challenge. In other words, conflict is a part of the change process that is needed to transform our belief systems. The test of authentic leadership is not about what we believe to be true, but whether there is trust, reciprocity, and risk-taking from others to love us so that we can actually move on. The personal self and the professional self, we have to come closer together. I'm sure that some of you have heard some of my life story, but I can tell you that my glasses are very different from President Kaler's. We've arrived both to be leaders in different respective institutions, and of course there's going to be discord and conflict that he and I have. But I love him as a human being. I love him as a white person who's trying to understand my world. I love him as a colleague who's trying to make school reform and our educational systems better. But too often, we let the dissonance and fear and the film and tension of conflict go on far too long without having conversations. And if we are lucky enough from people who are different from us to give us feedback about our own behavior and attitudes, we get defensive and we want to reject and ignore them. I have found this to be true, that it is hard to trust people of a different race, of a different cultural background, of people who have only lived with wealth and had means to actually have the luxury of choice. When I went off to Brown University, Most of the students there were of high wealth. And everybody mostly went off with a computer. Well, I went with a typewriter. And because no financial aid counselor reached out to me, I had no idea that I could take out more financial aid to actually buy a computer. So for the first 3 years at Brown University, I made myself a computer consultant so that I could sit in a computing cluster and actually write my papers, because that was the only way I could figure out how to not get kicked off of a computer so I could do my papers. Pretty sad, huh? But I still graduated. So how often is it, as a lesson, that we stay in our comfort zones and stay safe while others suffer? Here's when I see it. I see it when an educated and successful person of color refuses to take a risk to speak out because they are afraid. They are afraid that if they say something, there will be negative consequences for them professionally. I see it when someone in a dominant culture waits for the minority or the disadvantaged person to speak up for themselves, even when they are the ones who are being victimized and can't respond. They withdraw their ally support and refuse to use their privilege as a tool for good at a moment when it's most critical. Sometimes the person of color or the disadvantaged person isn't even believed. I see it when a person turns away from someone who sits in a wheelchair because it makes them uncomfortable. I see it when people choose to spend time in their free time only to socialize with people exactly like them, be it class, race, gender, disability status, or anything else. This morning I'm telling you that we have to disrupt our personal peace for progress to be made. And that means taking risks to advocate for ourselves and to be allies for others. It means that we have to hold hands across the alley. How often have I heard from a person of color or someone who's disadvantaged about the yucky, privileged white people who don't seem to understand? Well, you know what? It's our turn as people of color and people from disadvantaged backgrounds to extend our hand as well. Eric can't see through my glasses, and I can't see through his. Identifying and lifting our own self-imposed limitations as those of us who are from disadvantaged communities has to happen also before we can step into systems transformation. If we can use our education, our race, our gender, whatever it might be that's our privilege as a weapon of choice to defeat bigotry, hatred, social injustice, and practice every day how to identify and eliminate the toxic stress that builds up in society overall, there's hope for us in the future. I know as a lesson that it's easier to maintain the status quo, to say all the flowery words, and to simply allow things to be. Overall, I see as a society we lack courage, especially those of us who are institutional leaders, myself included at times. At Wilder, we have been hard at work to develop personal, organizational, and systems change to become more diverse and inclusive. And I want you to know it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Believing in equity and diversity is not enough. We are practicing it in our behaviors and learning how to make mistakes, recover, and learning how to do it better. In other words, we have discovered that just like being a great entrepreneur, to succeed more often, we must fail more often. This becomes more difficult the more diverse we become, as the lenses and the glasses from which we view the world continue to shift and change. So there's been great progress, right? At Wilder, staff of color have increased about 7% in 4 years. We're 40% people of color now. 75% of our workforce has taken the IDI, which is a tool that's used to actually improve cultural competency. And more than 30% of those who are in our organization are actually taking leadership of some kind. Promotions have increased 1% a year, and despite all of this, we still have a 4% turnover in employees of color. So we must sharpen our focus. But one of the things I've learned also is that we can all be so hard on ourselves when we choose this cause and we choose it to live it as a core value. We must be generous, forgive ourselves and each other, and continue to press forward. We must build each other's confidence that success will come, because intent does not equal effective impact. We offend because we have unconscious bias towards others, and despite our best attempts, our tongues turn into pretzels and we eat humble pie. And if we care, we come back again to improve and try something else. but all too often we just walk away. Self-directed professional learning and growth has to be done. You cannot rely on others to educate you. We all have these big brains, especially in academia. We need to use them, and we need to practice. In closing, I'd like to leave you with a challenge, because I've learned that believing in equity and diversity as a core value and in inclusion is good, but rarely is it enough. Because if we look at data sets anywhere, educational achievement, health, income, gender issues, we know that the root causes of some of the inequity that we see is because we can't extend our hands to make a difference. The disparities are large and they're persistent in almost every field that I have exposure to. So I challenge you to be advocates for the allocation or reallocation of resources, time, money, and people to generate the impact that we want to see in the world. So go back and examine your good intentions to see if there is measurable impact with the allocation of your resources. Examine your pocketbook to see if you are giving to the causes that you care about and putting your expertise and knowledge to good use. Are you mentoring enough students of color? Are you filling your pipelines with people who could be professors one day? Are you maintaining good relationships with the people of color and the people who are disadvantaged at the University of Minnesota? Think about your personal and organizational budgets as a reflection of what you value to see how much you are spending to advance equity and diversity. And pay attention to whether efforts here and everywhere you touch have the resources they need to actually move towards the vision that we all hold up high. I'm blessed to be in the position that I am, to be able to talk to you, to have overcome so many things in terms of adversity, to be here. But I want you to know that I'm not alone, that there are so many thousands of students like me right now at the University of Minnesota and elsewhere. And I hope that you take up the challenge here at the University of Minnesota and everywhere that you are a part of, including in your own families.